Okay, good morning, colleagues, and welcome to this, the 14th meeting of 2012 of the European and External Relations Committee. Can I request, as usual, that all mobile phones and electronic devices are switched off as they interfere with broadcasting, and move directly to agenda item 1, which is a decision on taking business in private. That business is agenda items 5, 6 and 7. And these are to consider our plans for the work programme, yeah?
Agreed.
Yeah. So can we take agenda item 5, 6 and 7 in private? Committee agreed? Excellent. Okay, moving on swiftly. Agenda item 2 is consideration of the latest edition of our Brussels Bulletin, which is compiled by Dr Ian Duncan. And I think people know the purpose of the Brussels Bulletin, so we'll go straight into Ian's report. Ian.
Thank you very much, Convener. Again, it's a very long report, and as you'll see, dominated by financial and monetary matters, not unexpectedly. A couple of things to note in this. The Council and the Commission are now trying to move toward establishing the rules for surveillance management of the Eurozone area budgets, which is the big area for action at the moment. The consensus has not yet emerged, but they are hoping to bring that together by December at the end-of-year Council. Alongside that, the big change, I suppose, is the European Stability Mechanism. Agreement has now been reached on that. This replaces the European Financial Stability Facility, the temporary one. The likely first customer will be Spain. But as you'll be aware, Spain is not inclined to move swiftly toward this, because the minute they move toward it, control of their budgets is more or less lost. At that point, other forces take over, and they are still very keen to retain as much sovereignty as they can. But that will be significant in coming up. A couple of other things just to note in here. You'll recall at the last meeting there were a couple of requests for further information, one on Syria, and there is a section here on the Syrian-Turkish developments, together with the EU's engagement with Syria. So that is also in here. A separate question was asked on the 4G network, and you've got a separate sheet on that, because I forgot. That's why it's not in the papers, but it's out with you just now. One final thing, which again has emerged, and we were expecting, of course, the Commission work programme for next year is now out. You will receive a detailed paper on that at the meeting of the 29th of November, when we will have our MEPs who will also comment on the future work of the Commission. But I'm happy to take questions on any other aspect of the bulletin.
Okay, Jamie McGregor.
Could I just ask you about the European Stability Mechanism? The 500 billion euros, which budget is that a physical amount of money which sits in a bank waiting to be used, or, and where does it come from?
This is one of these, banking is slightly magical, I think. The answer is no. There isn't a big Fort Knox capacity somewhere in deepest, darkest Brussels with all the money. The amount of money they have is 80 billion, which is given by the members of the Eurozone for this particular fund. But the remainder of the cash is what's called callable cash, which is a declaration on behalf of the particular Eurozone member that they will commit up to a certain amount of money should that money be required. So the big issue, of course, is callable money isn't money. Callable money is a promise. And the question then is, people are hoping not to be called upon to deliver against the promise, I think, is the reality.
So states countries like Croatia, for example, which is waiting to become a full member of the Eurozone, is that correct? I mean, I didn't know quite what the membership status of Croatia was.
Well, just to be very clear again, it's also important to distinguish between membership of the Eurozone and the use of the euro as a currency, and membership of the European Union. And there's a little section in here on enlargement, but just to update you on Croatia, it is seeking membership of the European Union. The currency question, I think, will be further away. It's likely Croatia's first in line to be a member. It's imminent, is the best description. It should really be happening very early next year. There's a little section, Jamie, just on
I saw that.
Yes.
That was what interested me, because you said, actually, in my ignorance, I thought Croatia was already a member, because they...
It is an applicant member at the moment, which means that it has a number of accords which it has signed with the EU, and in order to qualify for membership, they have to be able to demonstrate against a number of chapters that they are fully compliant with the community acquis and so forth. The likely date, they are now all but there. The likely date will be early 2013, but not to the Eurozone, only to the EU.
And can I ask one other question on that, then? When you say Bosnia and Herzegovina, is that the same place, or are they two separate states now?
No, that is the same place. It's a compendium nation, maybe, or a.
And are they in the same state as Croatia, or are they further back in the queue?
They are further back.
Right.
They are further back.
Right.
Ellen. Thank you very much, Kevin. I'd like to ask about the state aid rules. And I know that, I think it's a question of, it's not really covered very much in your bulletin rather than...
Give me that, Helen. Stick in my goodness, yes.
And that's something that is troubling myself and the Industrial Communities Alliance, which, I convene the cross-party group on in Scotland. And we had Professor Steve Fothergill come and speak to us over recent meetings, and one of the issues that he has highlighted, and I agree, I think that it's something of extreme importance to Scotland and other territories like Scotland, is the way that the rules are being redrafted in Brussels by the officials. And these rules, as I understand it, the way they're being redrafted will have the impact that in future any companies coming globally from anywhere in the world would mean that if they have more than 250 employees, they will no longer qualify for the state aid support. And that impacts in the sort of way that, for example, we would never have another Amazon on our doorstep, which obviously I've got in the border of my constituency with Dunfermline West constituency. So that's a matter of extreme importance. But I think one of the issues that troubles me greatly is there's, I am told, a very short window of opportunity of about 6 weeks between now and the end of December in which we should be making political representations to the Commission officials, and particularly the Commissioner responsible, who I understand is the Spanish Commissioner. And my understanding as well is that this decision is on a knife edge, that it could go either way. But that's why it's all the more imperative that we do have political representations. Now, I did go and meet with the Cabinet Secretary, the Deputy First Minister, on Monday this week and make representations on behalf of the Industrial Communities Alliance on that very issue. She has noted the matter. I don't know what she will do arising from that, but I feel that this committee should be aware, and I feel that there should be cross-party representation to the commissioners at a very senior political level in Brussels. And I think that it's something that if we don't do that, it means that for the future we will lose out in a very major way. And I just wondered if you could confirm if what I'm saying is accurate.
Yes, absolutely happy to do that, Helen. You're quite right. The window is a small window. They are looking to move very quickly because they wish this to be resolved. So by December, Commissioner Almunia has been very clear in his guidance on this, that he wants it to be fit for purpose, as he would argue. And so the big issue then is how should state aid, which is I feel like a public source of funding, how should that be used in the best way to provide the support to locating companies without providing the advantage to locating companies, which I think is the question which he's trying to resolve. I am aware that certainly the Scottish Government colleagues in Brussels have been inquiring quite avidly into this because they are quite concerned about it. And I do know the UK Government has had a number of meetings with the Commission on this. What I think might be useful is if I can come back to you with a more thorough update on where things stand for the next meeting, but I will circulate that note in advance given the timescale that we are facing.
If I may, convener, I'd just add that the fact is that the UK government and the French government and the German government are all singing the same song, I understand. So, the fact is that this is a decision that will be taken by officials and it will not be referred to politicians. And I think that, that is all the more reason why we as politicians should be making the very strongest representations to the European Commissioner concerned to say to him that, look, this would have a huge impact on areas like Scotland where the industrial decline has been severe. And it's certainly something the Industrial Communities Alliance has been making representations both at the Westminster level, obviously working through the UK member state. But I think it's something that we in Scotland, because we would be impacted on quite severely, should make the very strongest representations and join with the others in doing so at a political level.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Ellen Willie-Coffey.
Thanks, convener. I just wanted to ask a little bit about the enlargement process there that's mentioned in page 7 that members referred to a little moment ago. And you'll be glad to know it's nothing to do with Scotland's position, of course, but I'm looking at the interesting position with Kosovo and Serbia there. I note that Serbia has been granted, candidate status in March 12. And we do know that some countries still don't recognise the independence of Kosovo, which itself is a candidate country. There's going to be some considerable negotiation taking place to try and resolve this, and I suppose that's a huge understatement really there. But is the European Union likely to, in admitting or accepting Serbia to the process, to put some pressure on Serbia to recognise Kosovo? Because Serbia could hardly become a member of the European Union and object to Kosovo becoming a member of the European Union at some later stage, I would imagine, and the difficulties that would cause could be quite considerable. So do you have any further information on that, Ian, at all?
There is a big gulf between candidate status or confirmation of application and admission, and you'll notice in the dates that the country which was first in the queue and is still at the back is Turkey, and they have been seeking to draw this to a conclusion. But I think, as I explained to Jamie, what you have is that for each application there are a number of chapters covering things like judicial practice and competition rules and so on. And each of those chapters is investigated to show that they are fully compliant with what's called the acquis communautaire, the body of law. And any member state can put a hold on a chapter and just say no. And Turkey, for example, has 5 chapters being held at the moment. The other country, and I'm giving this as preface to answering your question, the other country which has significant problems is Macedonia. Now, Macedonia, one might have thought, shouldn't really have been a controversial country, but Greece objects to its name. So, although I've put down Macedonia, technically that's not true. It's FYR, Macedonia. Greece also objects to its flag, for example. And so it seems slightly trivial, but these are the kind of issues which can hold up what would be a very important step for a country such as Turkey or Macedonia. And in terms of where Serbia is, you're absolutely right. It would be an impossibility to conceive that Serbia could make progress without addressing the issues affecting Kosovo. That is absolutely true. Just as it's impossible for Kosovo to make progress without resolving the other issues around recognition. So, although they are here as applicant nations, I wouldn't anticipate them becoming members unless great progress is made in resolving these quite thorny political issues, which are very, very domestic in terms of the regional issues. The rest of the EU has been a little bit guilty in standing back and hoping they will resolve them themselves. And as you can see, as decades pass, the answer is no, they can't.
I don't claim to fully understand why some of the countries that you've mentioned in the paragraph there, like Greece and Cyprus and so on, still object to or still don't recognise Kosovo, when a whole range of countries throughout the world do recognise Kosovo. But that's for those countries to explain to us and for me to understand the reasons for that. But it does seem that there are some incredibly trivial impediments to being recognised, and to stop the whole process on the basis of a flag and the name that you use for your country is really quite...
It becomes... Greece objected to Macedonia erecting a statue to Alexander the Great, for example, and that was seen as a diplomatic issue, which you wouldn't normally have thought would be major, but actually was. I mean, the only hope, that's maybe a negative way of putting it, the situation with Cyprus, which is in itself a divided land, was not an impediment ultimately to Cyprus being admitted. However, the situation with Cyprus may well be an impediment to Turkey being admitted, given the relationship between Cyprus and Turkey. So there are other issues. But one would hope in the 21st century we're moving towards solving these issues rather than allowing them to be prolonged.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, Gonzalo Malik.
Yes. In terms of Syria and the arms embargo from the EU on Syria, I'm just wondering what arms are we selling Syria in the first instance, considering they're allied with the Soviet Union? And also in terms of the arm embargo, I mean, on one hand, there seems to be a wish to support one side of the conflict and not the government side. I'm not quite sure how that would impact on us. And do we in Scotland, for example, deal with arms with Syria at all? Does it affect us in any way?
That would be one of these areas I don't know a great deal about, to be honest. When you look at the position of the EU in terms of Syria, the public declarations as an institution is very much to be wishing to see a cessation of hostilities. That's their first step. I'm not sure of the weapons which are traded. Quite often arms embargoes are imposed irrespective of whether indeed there is a significant trade or not, because it's something that the EU can do. And what they're seeking to do here is, when you read the documents, not to take sides. However, when you read the newspaper articles about what member states are saying about particular things going on, then they are not bound by this need to try and impose a neutral position. So quite often there's a read across between what member states are saying and doing and what the EU would appear to be doing. But there is a separation. The EU cannot be seen to be involved in these matters in quite the way that it would be interfering without the mandate of all the member states to take it forward. So at the moment they're trying to broker a ceasefire before they move toward resolving the situation. But I will concede it's not an area that I know a great deal about. I can, of course, bring more material back.
I'm just wondering, because the embargo would only really mean that European Union states who are within the European Union would hold and sign up to this. It doesn't stop everybody else, in particular the Soviet Union, who are in fact their first ally in the first instance. So I'm just wondering what's the benefit of something like this?
Again, that's one of these areas that can be debated. Of course,
is this just posturing, or perhaps you can send me the information?
Yes, I mean, yes, I can. I mean, posturing does seem to play a large part in lots of these areas. Sometimes from posturing things can emerge, which is true. Let me do a little bit more research on this area so that I can provide that to you.
Thank you.
Okay, just Rod, I'll let you in a second, but just following up from Hans Allah's point there, in the Brussels Bureau's Bulletin, the very last section on Syria and Turkey, it says that the Foreign Affairs Council announced the suspension of bilateral cooperation programmes between the EU and the Syrian government. I'm just wondering, Ian, if you could give us some insight into what the impact is of that on the people of Syria, or if it's just at government level, but maybe if there's any of these programmes that have a direct impact on individuals.
I will need to provide you with more information. From my reading so far, and I'm going to ask Spice to help me in this, but from my reading so far, these were actually primarily to help the people of Syria, on one hand. There were a number of programmes to help governance, to help appreciation and learning between and sharing and so on. And there, of course, one of the bigger issues is always trade. So there was a number of these sort of structures to put in place to encourage trade. But there was a development programme which would have had a part of this. So again, if you'll allow me to come away from this meeting and bring you more material, then I'll be in a better position to brief you.
Thank you. Campbell. Sorry.
I'll wait for Hamzala if you
Thank you.
come back on that point.
Behind the back of the question you asked, I think it's very important. Perhaps we can also find out, if at all possible, are there any vulnerable groups who would have benefited from this, who may not now benefit as a result of this? Thank you.
Okay. Rod Campbell.
I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, a more straightforward one, I think. In relation to the timetable for the consultation on the high-level expert group on banking, what knowledge do we have of that timetable? Consultation ends on 13th of November. 2012, what's supposed to happen then?
The high-level group on banking was set up as a body to try and think beyond the current situation. So what you're seeing here is experts drawn from the member states who are trying to get a sense of, and if you look at the little bullet points talking about the banking reform here, you'll see that they are looking at some of the broader areas that are not currently under discussion within the reform structure. So some of the bigger stuff is the separation of proprietary trading and high-risk trading. So these are things where there is no answer as yet. They're trying to gather together the material whereby they can produce a paper, I would have thought early in the new year, which should feed in then to the next stage of integration of monetary policy and banking reform. But you will quite often find in the EU that high-level expert groups are appointed quite often to try and take the politics out of things so that they are experts rather than political or officials. And this is a way of trying to make sure that the European Commission is in possession of all the sort of thinking that it needs in order to make the next step. So I'm not sure if that does answer your question, but I think the report will emerge in January or February, and out of that will emerge then a response from the Eurozone, I think particularly, but possibly reading across to the Commission, about how these things could be taken forward, or whether indeed some may not be taken forward, and then they'll play into the agenda of the Council, probably the Spring Council in March, if not the Spring Council in March, then into the Summer Council. That will roll it forward.
And in relation to cohesion policy, in particular the Connecting Europe facility, what impact is the rejection of the budget by the Commission and Parliament, I think on a couple of days ago, going to have on that?
Ultimately, if there is no budget, then progress is all but impossible, in fact. I think that's true. A lot of hostages will be erected, I think, in the next period as different member states seek to secure their choices as the negotiations unfold. The big issue, of course, is the multi-annual financial framework. That is the overarching issue. That has to be brought, settled. Without that, everything else falters. We use the word budget, but of course, to be specific, budget means the annual budget, and the multi-annual financial framework is obviously multi-annual, so it rolls forward. I think what you'll see in the next period is a lot of posturing, and there is a lot of posturing in the EU. You will see a lot of that before it begins then to settle toward where consensus can be reached. Cohesion policy remains one of these areas where it was very popular when people got it, but member states no longer getting it don't like it as much. And so it has been seen as something of a sacrificial lamb. France, for example, will be quite keen to... France has said it has done its job, it has worked, therefore it need not continue. It's a little bit disingenuous, given that they're no longer in receipt of it, and yet many others are. So these things will be wrestled to the ground. But no, it would have a huge impact on the...
Yeah, no, I don't want to make your life more difficult, but just wondered, obviously events move. Is this gone to press, or is it going to be updated to take account of that development?
Yes. As we've discovered, there's a lag between the production of this and your seeing of it, and that lag is usually reflective of when I get it finished. So although these papers are sent on Monday, it tends to be finished and goes through its checks and so on earlier in that week. So there's usually about five days to a week. And events can get in the way of that, making it even more out of date, which sometimes, and I've been getting to the stage where I think I should stick in the word stop press and just stick a little bit in, because sometimes the stuff in it isn't really that right anymore. And you'll find in here there's a little bit saying stop press, because on the gender quotas, having written the whole section, I discovered the next day that they had decided not to take it forward. And then I put my stop press in, and I'm not rewriting it right now, I'll come back to it for the next one. Where it's clearly very pressing and you need to know it, you will know, and I will not try and pretend otherwise. But
Claire Adamson.
It was just to get a grip of it. I understand that if the budget isn't agreed by the member states, that it goes on to an annual budget. How long does that process last for annual budgets only?
well, yes, they roll over. That you're right. So they take the established last instalment and it just rolls forward. that can go on for a long time, actually. But clearly, there are lots of disadvantages to doing that because the budget itself doesn't reflect the needs. The budgets have been set for different purposes at a different time. So there is a huge incentive. That's one of the big sanctions which is often applied. If you do not sort this out, we will just roll over. Now, clearly, some countries which are going to lose out in the next round, the next multi-annual financial framework, have a huge incentive in that sense not to encourage that negotiation to be resolved, liking the rollover aspect. But eventually, even they are found out that you can't carry on that uncertain basis because programmes are not annular. They are set over a longer period, so you end up without any ability to plan or manage them. So quite quickly it unravels.
There was a couple of other questions on it. Just with the stop press on the gender issue, it says it's postponed the vote. Actually, that not to mean that they weren't going ahead, but they had postponed it. but what you've just said might indicate otherwise.
This annoyed me more than normal because I'd written quite a big section on this in the earlier part of the bulletin. And then, of course, this happened. What has happened here is that the Commissioner bringing this forward has not had the support in the College of Commissioners to take it forward in the form that she had anticipated it going forward. And so rather than say this is over or finished, what they've done is said this is very interesting and we certainly want to come back to this, but not right now. And so they have... but unfortunately, they haven't dated when they will come back to it. So you're left in this limbo status. It's one of the more controversial aspects of recent affairs. And it isn't often that something which the Commissioner has launched in the European Parliament, as she did, is postponed. That's an unusual, and I would have thought, slightly embarrassing thing for her. It doesn't happen often. But the way things work is the College of Commissioners must sign off all proposals and so forth, and they just haven't done that. Well, they've just said, not now. We'll come back to it. So.
And finally, it was about the SME consultation, about the bill for small, medium-sized enterprises. How do we communicate to the business community in Scotland that consultation is taking place? How will that be done? And is there anything we could be doing to ensure that they have a full...
I mean, a couple of things. I would hope that the Scottish Government and its agencies have drawn this to the attention of the appropriate bodies, Federation of Small Businesses and so on. I think but that's something we can confirm, so we should probably ask the Government to make sure that they have done that. The other thing, again, we can do is we should draw to the attention of the Economy Committee this particular issue, because they, I suspect, will have good offices with the various participants and make sure that they use those good offices to highlight this to others. The bulletin itself, as you'll be aware, is circulated quite widely now, so it does go to a number of organisations, including, I understand, the Federation of Small Businesses too. So they will see this bit. Thereafter, once we get the response from the Scottish Government, we'll be in a better position to see if there is anything we, as a committee, should be doing to raise the profile or awareness.
Will the scope of that bill actually be able to address some of the issues that small and medium enterprises have in applying for funding? Is part of that considered? Will they be able to make representation that the funding applications are too onerous?
Yes, it's one of the issues again is that the overarching rules about the application process are set, by the Commission, but the actual implementation of some of these falls into the hands of the member state, or sometimes, as in the case of Scotland, the region. And you'll see again earlier in the bulletin there are a number of innovations which have been adopted by other member states to try and just stop it being onerous, stop it being confusing, stop it being complex. And as long as these don't cut across any of the guiding or the set criteria, then that is fine. But yes, in a consultation, irrespective of what they ask, you are certainly entitled to say what you want. And that's something I would always encourage anyone to do.
Okay, Helen.
Very much, Convener. Just one comment on what Bill was saying, but also then to ask a question, and that is the point that Bill was making about Serbia and about Kosovo and that part of the world, Macedonia. I mean, I agree with him entirely that we should be keeping as close an eye as we're able to do given our other workload commitments. But I think that more than that, I know that a number of members around the table and other members in the Parliament have been very much involved with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, and I think that's something that's entirely laudable, and I myself have been involved with that as well, in particular regard to Macedonia. But I think there's maybe an opportunity for this committee to be a bit more engaged and involved in the spreading and sharing of knowledge and experience between ourselves and these countries in Eastern Europe. And I just think that, I'd like to see that feature a little bit more strongly in some of the work programme as we develop it, because I think that it's something that we have a lot to learn from them, but equally they can learn a lot from us. And I think apart from as a committee and as parliamentarians, what I'd also like to see is some of the heads of government services departments coming before us and telling us what initiatives they're engaged in sharing this knowledge and experience as well. And I'm thinking, for example, the seriously organised crime could perhaps work much more closely with some of the Eastern European countries, because sharing knowledge and experience of, the sex trafficking, the fraud, the, import of armaments and all the rest of it that shouldn't be going on, but that if we worked much more closely with them in sharing that knowledge and experience, maybe there would be benefits for all our countries in undertaking that work. And so, it's great that we're doing work with China and others, but we shouldn't forget the places a little bit closer to home and the vital importance of doing that, because there's obviously, I know from my constituency caseload, that there are people all over Scotland. I think there's 30,000 British people, for example, through my work with Bulgaria, have now invested in companies and businesses in Bulgaria. And that was in 1 year alone. I think the last figures I had for that was 2008 or 9 it was. So it just shows you that there's elements there of work that we should be doing. But I think that especially when it comes to the work with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, and the fact that, for example, with Serbia, a lot of my constituents can't go through Serbia to get to either Macedonia or to Bulgaria or to the other countries, because the British Association of Insurers will not insure people to go through that country. So, there's real practical reasons for our citizens as to why it's in all our interests here, not just for the people in those countries, because I'll tell you, by sheer accident, I didn't realise at the time, it's done and dusted now and it can't be undone, as I went through Serbia 1 year and I didn't appreciate that I wasn't insured at the time because, in my ignorance, but now I know, and now I wouldn't go through. But I can tell you that having done it, the road network there is absolutely the best in that part of the world, and it's a shame that my constituents can't get to their businesses and properties as a shorter route through Serbia because of the insurance issues. So that just gives you one example that confronts businesses and people who have their properties there as well. And I think it's something we should do. But certainly the Macedonian issue, they've been exercising huge efforts with professors, world-renowned professors, trying to resolve the difficulties with the name of the country and the flag and everything as well. But my question now for Ian is to ask him about the procurement. I know that on the 8th of October there was a series of votes, but I haven't kept up with them. And I'm wondering if you've kept up with them to find out what impact there was, because I know there's over 1,000 amendments tabled at that stage in the European Parliament. And I know it was really important for all of us about the social aspects of the clauses that were being voted on.
Yes, I was preparing my head for something else, another question. But yes, in terms of procurement, you raised this quite interestingly at our last meeting. The vote did indeed go through. The procurement bill, the procurement directive as it is now moving forward, is going to be much more supportive of the areas you were looking at. It did not get stripped of the social provisions which a number of members in the European Parliament are very keen to achieve. So it is a far more robust law, if you like. That's not the end of it, of course. There's another stage to go before this is finally resolved, and a lot of these amendments, of course, can be wheeled back in another guise. So it's not over yet. That will be by the end of the year. We should see greater clarity on the final emerged position from the Parliament.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Convener. Of course, that impacts hugely on our supported businesses like Remploy and others here in Scotland. So it's good news, but we'll have to watch this space, is what you're saying.
Do.
Okay.
For a wee while more.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be helpful to just have that as a running item on the Brussels Bulletin. Just Ian, to pick up a couple of points on the issue about enlargement. Helen is absolutely right, and her experience across all of these lands is always very welcome to the committee. My own interest in the project that I'm involved in with the Westminster Foundation in Montenegro, when I was out there in the summer, I did meet with the person who's out there working with our committee system and working with our parliament, working with our procurement laws to end some of the corruption. So they're moving very, very swiftly towards some of the EU points that they have to sort out before they can then, go forward to EU status. So they're working very, very hard on that, and I did see some really interesting ways to do that and lots of learning from other countries, which was very good. So that was just a wee point on that. On the Croatia point, I'm sure the Minister for Foreign Affairs from Ireland that we met last week said that she was disappointed that Croatia would enter the EU the day after the Irish presidency finishes on the 1st of July. So, because they were quite keen to be, welcome a new nation into the EU. So I think that's scheduled around about the 1st of July. So I think who then picks that one up? Do we know who the presidency is? It's getting the benefit of that one.
So, you've asked me a question I should know the answer
to.
No,
we'll leave it with you. Okay.
It's Greece. Greece is next.
Okay.
Yes,
Greece
good.
Welcome you,
it's like Trivial Pursuit there, but I did, yes, it's Greece. Good.
On the other thing, Claire Adams has obviously raised a very good point, and I had it highlighted myself to raise about the gender quotas, because it's something obviously I've followed very, very keenly, and hopefully with the committee's approval, we should draw that to the attention of the Equal Opportunities Committee. It's something that maybe they could take a wee look at. I had the great honour of meeting the Commissioner, Deputy High Commissioner for Rwanda yesterday, who was talking about the quotas that they have in their constitution for gender balance, which is 30%, which reflects obviously what Viviane Reding has suggested for EU boards. Rwanda built that into the constitution a number of years ago is a means of healing their society after the really brutal civil war. But their gender quota is actually sitting in their parliament at 56% women right now, which probably is, the result of that is the fact that health and education are the top priorities, and they have now introduced a free universal education system. So the benefits of having the women in charge, I think, is something that we should look at. But hopefully the committee would agree to bring that to the Attention of Equal Opportunities Committee, because it's something I think we should pursue. And finally, on the other thing about SME and entrepreneurship, is if you could give us a wee insight into how that will impact on Horizon 2020, given that a key element of that is to increase SME engagement. And I see that only Austria, Germany and Malta recovered to their 2008 position, whilst a number of other countries didn't. There's no mention of the UK there that I can see. Maybe if you could let us know where the UK is on that list. Thank you.
That's fine. Looking at the list, I'm quite surprised the UK isn't in it. That's because I've obviously left it out. It has not recovered. No, it should be in the list of not recovered to its previous position at all. In terms of the relationship between Horizon 2020 and SMEs, this has been widely recognised by those behind the Horizon 2020 programme as a serious problem, not just in the UK but across the whole of the EU, and this certainly is an area that one of the difficulties is that the Commission often employs a bunker mentality where the people who deal with the SMEs work in one bunker and the people who work in research and development are in another one, and it's trying to encourage the dialogue within the offices in Brussels that can be the biggest challenge of all. But this now is widely recognised as a failing, and so to try and ensure that the SMEs are the beating heart of the Horizon 2020 programme is a major ambition. So both sets of officials are now working very closely together to achieve that. So yes.
Okay, committee content to... Oh, Billy. Sorry.
Ms Convener, could I just come back and endorse the comments that you made yourself and what Ellen Eadie said about the Westminster Foundation and our relationship with some of the Balkan countries? Through my experience in the Audit Committee, we had visiting delegations of MPs from those assemblies, and they were very keen to establish some kind of link with us to talk about accountability, scrutiny and so on, and how to hold their own emerging governments to account. I don't know if there's been any real formal follow-up to those engagements, and I don't wish to give the committee or the Parliament any more work than it's currently in undertaking, but it might be useful to see if this committee could, even by video conference or other means, try to establish some kind of linkage with those countries, and perhaps some kind of topic discussion day for perhaps to just to explore how we can further help those countries in the subjects and the areas that they're interested in. Because sometimes I think when they do visit us, that's really the end of it, and we don't really hear very much from that point on. So if that was a possibility for us as a European Committee, that would be really very much appreciated, I think, if it was possible to do that.
Okay, Jim's just given me a wee bit of information that the UK IRO office in the Scottish Parliament is working very closely with the Westminster Foundation, so it's maybe worthwhile inviting them along for a briefing to let us know how that engagement's taking place, and maybe, you know, to address some of the follow-on opportunities that maybe that we're missing out on. Yeah. Helen.
I'd like to support all that Bill has said there, because I think the idea of a video conference would be good, because you know, it doesn't then open us up to accusations of, you know, wanting to go off for, you know, visits and all the rest of it. We're actually wanting to do a real job of work with these people, and if there's an economic way to do it, then I think that's an excellent idea to do that.
Okay, good. Are we content to send the Brussels bulletin to other committees for consideration, with the proviso of writing to the two separate committees that we mentioned to draw out the specific points, the Equal Opportunities Committee and the Economy Committee? Yep.
Is the 4G paper part of that? Did you say?
It should be part of that. We will make sure that is.
Could I throw in a little comment about the 4G paper, because it might not come up elsewhere? Just to say thank you to Spice for producing the little briefing note on 4G, and as members know, 4G arrived, was it yesterday? I think an appropriate time during Halloween, because the pricing certainly gave everybody a fright. I think looking at how this develops in the UK and throughout Europe, I would like to see, and I don't know really whether the committee will take an interest in this directly, about how 4G is developed in the other European countries. Some of them have had it for 3 years, and yet that's mentioned in the paper there. But what I'd like to see is how these other countries provide 4G coverage in their countries and what they charge their customers for it, because it seems pretty expensive to me initially. And I know that always happens when a new technology arrives, and it will ultimately settle down. But I really don't have any view about what other countries are charging for these services. And I think that's crucial to actually exploit that technology. And whether we decide to look at it at some point in the future, convener, I'll just leave that in your own hands.
Yeah, I think it's maybe important to keep an eye on that one, Ian. Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, Francesca was able to bring this together, which was very good. We can, again, ask her for an upgrade, if you like, on these areas, so we see those. I certainly am aware, again, the 4G issue is another committee in the Parliament is also, I think, exploring this, and we will bring this to their attention as well and establish where they stand on the issue as well, so that you're aware of what's going on inside the Parliament.
Okay, does that address your point? Yeah. Okay, moving on to agenda item 3, which is a report from the Committee of the Regions Open Days event, which I attended on the 8th and the 9th of October. And you've got quite a lot of papers in your papers today, and all the presentations. I felt that to give you the presentations would actually be a much better way to let you see just some of the points that were raised. It was a very bit of a whirlwind visit. I went straight from the airport straight to the reception, from that straight into a meeting with some of the Committee of the Regions people who are over there, and first thing the next morning then back in for the actual presentations. At the end of the day before heading back to the airport, I did get a good 45-minute chat with Scotland Europa, which was just something I took advantage of while I was there, and spoke to Ian and the Scottish Government side of that too. So got a wee update on where they are taking forward Horizon 2020 and some of the other issues of interest to the committee. On the main presentation, which was actually hosted by Stuart Maxwell MSP, which I didn't realise because I only had an outline of the actual event before I went over. There was 2 main presentations there, which were basically the most important. The one from KU Leuven from Professor Conrad De Backer, yes, I think. And Mr Gorka, which I'm going to try and pronounce his second name for fear of getting it wrong and hurting his feelings. Both of those are come from small, emerging areas, you know, that see themselves as economic drivers, and the connections that they already had with Scotland and the work that they're already doing across generating their Horizon 2020 programmes, very, very close to the work that this committee did at the beginning of the year on our deliberations and our recommendations to the Commission on Horizon 2020. I've given a wee overview of what each of them said, and then given you a wee sort of opinion piece from me on how I felt that impacted on what we could get involved in the future. So I really just leave it with the committee. If you've got any questions, happy to answer. And if you've got any ideas for taking up, I'm looking for my wee report. Is it right at the back? Yeah, over there. As you can see, it would have been easy to go into pages and pages of detail, to be honest, because the presentations from both of these gentlemen were so interesting. So I've taken the main points and the ones that actually chimed much more with our committee work programme. So happy to take any questions or any ideas for taking it forward.
Chair,
Hans Allen.
just one small note, and that is, I think you didn't give yourself a lot of time. I think sometimes you need that flexibility, and particularly when you're meeting people to discuss issues off the record. I think that's important in terms of networking. Perhaps if you have the opportunity in the future to consider that element, because I think it's important to, you know, press PAMs and meet the face that we talk to and exchange ideas. And for that, you need a little flexibility. Perhaps you could build that into your next visit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Helen said, that we always have to be cognisant of how much these things cost, and I had a very limited budget, which meant only one overnight stay. So that's why we packed so much into it. And the flights are a bit odd as well, you know, getting over in the middle of the late afternoon and having to come back in the middle. So it was pretty tough. But your point's well made and noted. Anyone else? No? Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 4. Which is a feedback from me again. You'll be sick listening to my voice today on the European Committee Chairs UK meeting, which was in Belfast, and I was accompanied over there with Jenny, Jen and Ian, which was actually very helpful because they managed to corner different parts of the agenda and give me the right advice as we went. The main event of that meeting was the briefing from the Irish Government's Minister of State, Lucinda Creighton, on the Irish presidency and their plans for the European Council. They start in January 2013, so they seemed extremely well geared up for it. They were a bit, I think, ahead of the game in terms of some of the questions we were asking them about where they were. And they have 3 main priorities for the presidency, and I'll just read them so that you know exactly, and I've got them exactly right. Restoring stability by implementing the EU's new economic governance rules and procedures. And I have to say they seemed very optimistic in achieving that, which was good to see given Ireland's own challenges. The second one was sustainable economic growth through boosting competitiveness and creating jobs. And another aspect of that was that they're looking at a capital programme, you know, of creating jobs as well, which is also something that we've looked at here. And 3 was focus on the multi-annual financial framework, which I think is going to be a challenge for them, but they seemed well genned up for that challenge. The key issues up for resolution are obviously the negotiations on CAP and the Common Fisheries Policy, Horizon 2020 and the Cohesion Policy. So all aspects that Ireland will take forward that this committee is very, very interested in. We then had a Q&A session with the EC UK members and the Minister, which went into a lot of detail on how they've managed to take forward some of their plans and how they're seeing very tentative recovery coming back to Ireland, and that's also welcome as well. We had Dominic Hannigan, who is the chair of the Committee of the European Union Affairs, from the House of Oreactus. I was going to say that, but I wasn't sure whether it was right. Who attended as well and gave us some of the update from there. Issues covered in the discussion with the Minister included enlargement, which we have just spoken about, and they were obviously, as I said, disappointed that they weren't going to be the presidency that welcomed Croatia, but wished them all the best. The EU integrated maritime policy, specifically blue economic growth and fishing disputes on mackerel. Jamie, you will be very interested that Ireland, obviously being a fishing country themselves, are very interested in resolving that issue. A very decent presentation, I have to say, on the Peace Programme 4 in Northern Ireland, which is a EU-funded programme, and it's the next stage in their peace process. Interestingly, from the Northern Irish people at the meeting were expressing the fact that you strip out the sectarianism issue in Northern Ireland, and the real key issue is poverty, opportunity and jobs. So nothing that's not that we don't know about here, but I think their Peace Programme 4 is going to look at addressing those key points, because lack of opportunity and poverty can sometimes create division and resentment, and that's one of the things that they're working very, very closely on. The main EC UK meeting was then followed by a discussion with all the chairs. We gave an overview of our committee's work, and everyone did the same. We gave the progress update on the Scottish Parliament's EU strategy, which there was a few questions on that and very much a lot of interest. The FCO review of the balance of competencies, which I think is something we're coming back to with the House of Lords Committee. Scrutiny of the EU secondary and delegated legislation, which was also another concern there and for further discussion. And subsidiarity and proportionality, there was quite a robust discussion on the impact that has. I don't know if there's anything there that we want to expand on. That no,
very comprehensive.
No. Any questions or queries or comments? Helen?
Just make the comment that I think that's very helpful, Convener. I think it's good to have the kind of report that you've given that's sort of given us the headlines of what you were discussing, and it's something that I've been a member of this committee previously prior to this parliamentary session, and I don't actually remember any of the chairs actually giving a report in the way you've done. So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Willie?
Thanks, Convener. Was there any discussion in Belfast about the UK Government's plans for corporation tax and air passenger duty for Northern Ireland? I attended the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly recently, and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Teresa Villiers, announced that she was supportive of the measure for Northern Ireland, but was keen to put it on ice for Scotland until after the referendum in 2 years, which I found particularly an interesting position to adopt. Given that the competition that there could be there, was there any chat or discussion about that?
There wasn't actually. There was a conversation on radio about it this morning, because I think some businesses and some airports are really feeling the pinch on this one. So it's maybe something that we can look at and take forward. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Willie. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, just to come up at the back of that comment you just made. I think that's quite important in terms of us attracting airlines to Scottish airports. And perhaps we can determine exactly what the difference would be. Now, it's been suggested it'll be £1 per head per passenger. But more importantly, what I want to find out is how much it's going to be per head per plane, in terms of how much more would it cost the air operators, because that's what would really determine the difference between a passenger travelling from a Scottish airport or using a Scottish airport than not using a Scottish airport. So perhaps we can try and tease out that difference. And it doesn't necessarily need to be reported at committee. I mean, you can just simply send me that information. If it's only significant, we can bring it here. If it's not really all that significant, then that's fine.
I think I would just add to that it's not a comparison between the Scottish airports and other UK airports standalone. I think that comparison should be made, but it's also to other airports, because one of the comments I heard this morning was that people are just bypassing, stopping off in Scotland and going straight to Amsterdam and Paris, and so we're losing out again to European airports that are much more open and friendly in that respect. But it's maybe worth a bit of investigation. Yeah, happy with that? Okay. Moving on to agenda item 5, 6 and 7, which we agreed at the beginning of the meeting to take in private, so we'll now move into private session. And can I thank the members of the public for coming along? Clear the gallery.